Good afternoon to all the attendees. First, I'd like to thank for this great event, TÜBİTAK, and you are all welcome to the afternoon session of the International Workshop on Geothermal Energy for Sustainable Development. We all know that we all know that energy matters, and humanity always find a way to secure its energy needs. Nowadays, it's again becoming a topic because of the climate crisis, and we need to understand that it's not only the energy matters, but it's also important how we are and from which source we are producing our energy. And if we are talking about the resources, definitely geothermal is one of the best options by being clean, sustainable, green, and having the minimum carbon footprint worthwhile. So in this session, in this first session of this afternoon, I have very precious speakers with me. We are going to start with Alexander RICHTER, then we will continue with Dornadula Chandrasekram, then Erhan Şener, Şehnaz Şener, and Ali Tolgay will join us with some case studies. And we will talk about where we are with geothermal, what are the new innovations in the market. We'll talk about a bit enhanced geothermal systems and see how our academia is working on that in relation with the case studies to be presented. Alex, welcome. You are the first speaker, so I would appreciate if you can start by introducing yourself. No matter I forgot introducing myself, I will do it in the end. Mic is yours. You are muted.
After all those years in COVID, I think everyone should know the mute button. Sorry for that. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, and very grateful for the kind invitation to speak to you today, and to my friend Chanur. So I'm very, very pleased to see you all. My name is Alexander RICHTER. I'm the Managing Director of the Iceland Renewable Energy Cluster in Iceland, which includes a geothermal cluster representing the Icelandic geothermal energy industry. And at the same time, and that's maybe where people know me the most, is as editor and founder of Think GeoEnergy, the predominant geothermal news platform for the industry. We also maintain a Turkish platform that I was very honored to have Chanur working with us on that. And we've naturally shown a lot of interest in Turkey and the development in Turkey over the years. So with our own conference and engagement with players, so very, very pleased. In particular, in that regard, very pleased to be with you here today. And with that, I think I would just start my presentation, and I will share my screen now in the hope that you can see this.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so when I was asked to present to you, there was an emphasis on maybe talking about technologies and how that is changing our industry. So I thought I addressed this a little bit differently and prepared the presentation accordingly. And I want to start with one statement I think that a lot of people of you have seen me using before. And one of the big challenges of our industry is that we are very much misunderstood as a source of energy in the current energy market. In that regard, I think one of the most crucial aspects is the fantastic role that geothermal energy can play. So what I did a while ago, we kind of tried to highlight the attributes of geothermal energy and how do we fit into the picture of renewable energy. And this is neither scientific nor academic. It's just basically taken a very simplified approach of the different renewable energy sources. Here in that regard, of course, hydropower would fit in as well. And it shows essentially the key attribute of geothermal energy providing not only electricity, but also heating and cooling, and that quite directly. So while we have biomass and solar producing heat, and that then producing electricity, Wind is only producing electricity, and solar photovoltaic as well. While geothermal energy as a predominant heat source can be used directly to produce electricity as well as heating and cooling. And that is particularly important also in the context of storage, where heat in many aspects is seen as a favorable approach to storing energy. And that makes geothermal very attractive. And I will kind of talk a little bit about this in my presentation. And of course, I always have to present some data. And in this case here, the current status of geothermal power generation capacity installed, clearly highlighting here the very interesting role of Turkey, as probably not as the predominantly known geothermal country per se in the past, but clearly having climbed up to number 4 in the world with regards to the installed power generation capacity, clearly has shown the world of how one can develop geothermal, and that relatively quickly. So in that sense, basically kind of as a starting point for this presentation. And also a lot of people know me talking a lot about in my presentations about the ecosystem of the geothermal energy industry and how important it is that we understand that the geothermal energy industry consists of various different players with different interests, different background, different technical aspects, scientific, etc., etc. And I think it is absolutely crucial to highlight that we need all of those aspects together to kind of define and work with our industry. So innovation and technology development basically will take place in all those different aspects. And they are quite crucial in the context of promoting geothermal energy. We often look at mainly the core industry functions of resource exploration and development, as well as the scientific research that is part of it. But we need to understand that a lot of technical aspects by the equipment suppliers and developers are as crucial. And of course, the customers and the consumers of the energy that we produce are also driving certain aspects and innovations of our industry. The related industries and the government agencies and departments, of course, are very important as well. And then there's another aspect as well, and these are aspects as financing, geoscience, business consulting, financing. And I would also say that the aspect of promoting the geothermal sector through media, public relations, and news reporting is as crucial in that whole puzzle as well. And I think one of the main aspects, if we look at geothermal today, is the way of how do we extract and utilize geothermal energy and the different sources. And again, this is a very tricky aspect. And here in this picture, we try to come up with a picture that kind of looks at kind of what are the resources that we're using when we talk about geothermal energy. So here, the notion of utilizing heat pump, so the use above the surface, and how we kind of extract that energy, either with heat exchange systems, shallow, so shallow piping systems and conductive piping used for heat pumps, ground source heat exchange systems, etc. In shallow depths. We have heat exchange systems that are deeper. So here, single well and closed loop concepts, for example. And then basically the notion where that resource becomes a little bit blurring between direct water conduction and heat exchange. So here, for example, aquifer storage of heat, tapping existing heat sources, for example, from mines and tunnels, etc. All kind of ways of how we can extract heat. If that would be defined as geothermal heat, for example, from train tunnels or car tunnels, for example, is a bit of a definition question. But I think the use of old and flooded coal mines, for example, would be considered kind of tapping directly into geothermal heat. And then we have the water-based heat conduction and use. So here in the form of steam, hot water, or brine. So we have the hydrothermal systems, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on as well. We have supercritical systems, so basically drilling very, very deep for very, very high temperatures. And then we have the petrothermal systems, which are essentially engineered systems that utilize hot rock or granite-based. And then basically we use different technologies to extract that heat to be utilized for whatever we're going to use the heat for. So this is kind of setting, I think, the scene for some of the aspects when we look at geothermal energy resources and the way we extract and utilize them. I'm not going to go much into detail about the geothermal development stages, but of course, those stages are very important when we look at different technologies and technology innovation and how important they are for the different aspects of the geothermal sector. So for example, if you look at the power plants, for example, in the design and the construction of the power plants, I think essentially the technology itself has not changed that dramatically over the last 10 to 20 years. We have the classic flash-based systems, we have binary cycle systems, and most of that technology has been around for a long time. There are certain efficiency tweaks, etc., but technically the system has not changed so much. In the context of how we explore for geothermal resources, how we drill for resources, and how we extract that, clearly that's a different scenario. And I'll go into this in detail. Another aspect, of course, are regional specifics for geothermal resources and the way we extract geothermal resources. This is a paper that came out earlier this year that I provided our power plant data to, and it was looking into the geothermal resources, the tectonic plates, and trying to kind of provide a picture of how distributed binary cycle systems are versus double flash, single flash, and dry steam systems. And looking at kind of like the regional distribution of how we are tapping geothermal energy for power generation. And clearly it shows that the high temperature resources are really tied into the classic volcanic systems, while binary cycle systems basically are going beyond and providing a much wider use of geothermal energy beyond the traditional hot regions of this world. So, we talked a little bit about the approach of exploration and technologies, and I think we've seen in the past 10 years a lot of development in that regard, and I think that is something that has been helping the geothermal sector quite a bit, and I think we can't value this high enough. In the European context, you know, exploring for geothermal resources in urban areas naturally is a very challenging thing because you need to do seismic studies. And here is a very interesting example. It's a seismic truck in the city of Geneva in Switzerland. We have similar pictures of trucks in the middle of the city of Munich in Germany, basically doing seismic studies within the city parameters. Here, the idea is to explore the underground for potential geothermal development. And clearly, these 3D seismics have changed quite a bit of how we are de-risking geothermal projects in the world. We have increasingly an utterly exciting approach of utilizing drones for geothermal exploration. And here in the bottom picture, you have a picture where we're basically tied with software. You basically run air-based surveillance with drones, and they're basically running a predetermined pattern across an area, and with heat and other measurements, you can actually provide some really fantastic early stage exploration data that can then help in on the ground surveys, geochemistry studies, and then defining the approach of where to drill. We've seen also new technologies with so-called heat needles or heat nodes. For example, I mean, they sound kind of like very tiny little things, but they clearly are being used today to explore for geothermal. So this is a very interesting also technical approach. We're seeing that maybe less a technical aspect of innovation, but we see an increasing approach of using slim wells for geothermal development. And here, of course, the idea is to drill faster and cheaper to kind of determine if there's a resource that you can tap. And what we see today is that we're actually seeing actually approaches for development of power projects utilizing slim wells. Of course, these are not large projects, but it also shows that how we can mix certain technologies and approaches to development and resource de-risking in the development of geothermal resources. And increasingly, we see a lot of different software approaches to managing resources, for exploration, for management of resources. Here, a fantastic model of this New Zealand company Sequent with its Leapfrog 3D modeling software, which is now being used with all the major geothermal developers and operators, which naturally change completely how we can look into reservoirs and manage those responsibly. So here clearly we see a lot of technology, and there probably are a lot more, but very interesting aspects of technology development that help in the early exploration of geothermal. On the aspect of geothermal development, I showed you earlier this approach of the hot temperature resources versus lower temperature resources. So everything 150 degrees Celsius and above, for example, that you would require for flash-based systems. And we have the ORC units. And what is very interesting to see is that most of the ORC units actually have much smaller sizes. So they're being applied on smaller scale and help to kind of scale up development if the resources are favorable. We've seen a business development a model of using wellhead power generation units here by an Icelandic company in Kenya. And here the idea is providing smaller scale flash-based turbines for development. And we see binary technology being set up, for example, by Ormat in Kenya, but of course in Turkey as well as a good example. And for example, I don't show this chart now in this presentation, but the studies that we did comparing the geothermal development in Indonesia and Turkey, the average size of an Indonesian geothermal plant is around 49 megawatts. And as far as I remember, in Turkey, it's around 19 megawatts. So it shows the difference in size and also kind of how this defines of how we develop geothermal. And then recently we've seen a lot of ORC development in really small size development here, 120 kilowatt and below. And here the idea is utilizing hot springs without kind of the fear of tapping and drying out these hot spring resources, for example, in Japan, with small 120 kilowatt units, for example, in the area of Beppu in Japan, with lots of suppliers now in this market providing different solutions. Here in Iceland, we have several units set up of now around 1 megawatt in total. And we even have a very small 40 kilowatt unit set up at the Geothermal Spa, which is a hot spring area. And they're now basically setting up because the water of the hot spring is so hot, they cannot use it directly for the thermal spa. So they're basically putting up a power unit in between to cool down the water to then use it. So basically you don't waste the heat energy that you have available. And the same is with the project in Flu there in Iceland. The Colombia project is very interesting. It's a new Spanish player here with the Canadian developer, basically utilizing the hot water of oil production wells for power generation. And that's also showing a very interesting development, both technology, but also the way of how we as a business model change the utilization of geothermal energy. and to show a little bit of the differences in how we are tapping geothermal resources today and the challenges thereof. This is an overview that we showed earlier this year in October at the World Geothermal Congress, and I'll go into a little bit more depth about that. But basically, from the ground source heating and cooling down to super deep and supercritical resources for geothermal. We have closed loop systems and these both shallower and deeper. And all of those naturally have different technology aspects with regards to how we extract geothermal energy. But let me go into this a little bit more deeper here. So of course we have the heat pump system in here. These are heat exchange systems, basically where you always need electricity to utilize the energy. And the hotter the ground is, of course, the more efficient the heat pumps become if you utilize it for heat or cooling. And that's why we've seen also a lot of development in deeper heat pump systems and heat exchange systems. A good example is a company in Norway, which uses deep geothermal systems, heat exchange systems. There's another company in Finland that does the same thing, and they're drilling down to 2,000 meters with a heat exchange system. And of course, where this then kind of qualifies for geothermal versus heat pumps is naturally a bit of a question. And then we have the flooded coal mines here, the heat exchange plants. And again, how you would then define this as a heat pump versus as a geothermal system is naturally a little bit difficult. If we then go further and we look at conventional hydrothermal resources, of course, we have the hydrothermal systems. Here, the heat source being, in most of the cases, volcanic. And you're basically drilling for hot water reservoirs that are heated by lava or the heat source of the subsurface. And then we have the hot sedimentary aquifers, which are predominant, for example, in Turkey, or also in Germany, also in settings in Canada and in Nevada, where basically you have, with a heat gradient, the deeper you drill, and you basically drilling for water here. And you utilize that, but in most of those cases, these are lower temperature resources that you would utilize with a binary system. And then you have the enhanced geothermal systems. Here, I mentioned this before. So the hot rock, dry hot rock systems, and the idea is basically how to extract that heat. And in the past, basically, we had these classic EGS systems. So the general idea was to stimulate and not to use the word frack, but the idea was to stimulate the ground, to create more permeability in the rock, pump down water, let it heat and pump it up. We've seen now a lot of technology development in that regard that comes mostly from the shale gas systems, where basically instead of, really wildly stimulate a whole well, you actually would multi-stage fracking of certain elements of the well. So you basically pump down, you set down packers within the well, and you stimulate between these two packers. So you kind of stimulate this way more localized. And with that, the idea is that you are way more efficient in the way you extract the heat. So you would basically only frack and stimulate basically in areas of the well where there's a lot of heat. And this way you can more efficiently extract heat as part of an EGS system. And we've seen this applied in Canada, for example, in Saskatchewan, but also by the company Fervo Energy, which is developing a project together with Google in Nevada. So clearly there's been a lot of development in that regard, and we see, and there will be a lot of development further going on. And then we have the so-called advanced geothermal systems. Here, the closed loop systems. And essentially, if you were to be very critical, you say it's basically an over-glorified heat pump system, because you basically, instead of putting up a closed loop system in shallow depth, you do that, further deeper under the ground. And the idea is you drill basically a closed loop system pump down water or any other fluid or gas that basically would extract the heat, and you utilize it on the surface for power generation or heating. And of course, this has been, people have been very critical about that. Some of them, of course, with conflicting technology aspects, but clearly we're seeing some project development in that regard, and there will be, for example, a project now in Germany where that will be used to revive an unsuccessful geothermal project. So clearly this will be very exciting to see, also with regards to the cost of drilling and the economics of the project. Then we've seen the single well systems. Here I mentioned this earlier with heat exchange systems in the traditional heat pump approach, but we also see this in the context of power generation here with a company from California called Greenfire Energy, with a patented system, a loop system here. A similar system is being developed by Sage Geosystems out of Texas. And there are probably a few more that do similar things here. None of that is commercially yet proven. Pilot projects have proven that this works. And it's just a matter of technology development, drilling technology, etc., to make this economically viable. But if that succeeds, it naturally changes geothermal completely. And then we have
5 minutes, Alex.
Yes, and then we have supercritical fluids and systems. Here, the idea is to drill into very high temperature resources and thereby multiply the amount of energy you can extract out of geothermal systems. Iceland Deep Drilling Project, which is now the Krapla Magma Testbed Project. We have similar projects in New Zealand. And the crucial aspect here is, number one, drilling technology that speeds up the drilling, so drilling becomes cheaper. And it's about materials and technology to manage these high temperatures. We're looking at 300, 400 degrees Celsius and more. And of course, this is very important. We see also an increasing look into offshore geothermal. How realistic that is a bit of a different question. But clearly, it's being looked at utilizing old abandoned oil platforms in the North Atlantic, for example, and maybe also combine this with energy storage, also being used a lot in carbon capture and storage, or also in the notion of producing hydrogen. And then kind of coming towards the end of the presentation, the aspects of electricity versus heat. And of course, who has listened to me in the last couple of years has heard me say this before, the heat aspect of geothermal will be incredibly more important and crucial in the whole energy transition than it might be for electricity. But even though with the new technologies, that might change. And we expect the growth of geothermal to particularly in the context of space heating to be quite dramatic. So we see a tripling of production of geothermal heating going forward. And as I said, I think one of the crucial aspects that we're seeing here in geothermal is that the lines between what we call shallow geothermal and heat pump systems are increasingly blurring between traditional geothermal and heat pumps. And a good example is the city of Helsinki in Finland, which basically for its district heating system is using a mix of heat pumps, both shallow but also deep heat exchange systems. The ultra deep well in granite, here the 6,000 to 7,000 meter well drilled, and a thermal storage project in salt caverns in the city of Helsinki. And that shows kind of how this is growing increasingly together. And this is why I've been saying actually more and more is that we are moving from a purely geothermal industry to a more and more geoenergy industry. And we've seen actually a lot of interest in the oil and gas sector for geothermal. I mean, there's been a lot of investment. There's been a lot of interest. And what is interesting to see now, I think it's not just a temporary thing like we've seen in the 80s and the early 2000s, I think this is really changing now, and there will be a lot of push of the oil and gas sector, and also an increasing mix of technologies and the utilization. And of course, that all kinds of different direct use applications, heat applications are changing things dramatically. And we see now geothermal development in Munich, in Copenhagen, in Rotterdam, clearly not countries that we've seen as geothermal countries in the past. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope this was interesting and open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Alex. Definitely. I think you would be the only person who can provide this worldwide comparisons and where the geothermal market or geo market is going. So we have received one question for you from Professor Chandra. He's wondering the reasoning behind the growth in the Turkey in the installed capacity, increase the acceleration of the installed capacity for the past years. He says till 2012, Turkey recorded just 114 megawatts of geothermal power. But now at 2020, the generation climbed over, let's say, 1.6 gigawatts. So could you throw some light as to what changed or boosted or formed a catalyst in Turkey? The policy, economic-wise, to see such a huge boost and growth in generation in such a short span of time?
Of course, it's a mix of various factors. And I think one of the most crucial aspects clearly is the Renewable Energy Act that was introduced in Turkey. It is about the feed-in tariffs that were set up that provided a favorable tariff. And of course, the denomination in US dollars made it very attractive for the various Turkish conglomerates to basically produce electricity for their operations and for the market. And that basically created a very market-driven and interesting market for companies to develop. At the same time, the government de-risked a lot of the projects, and the drilling costs were quite favorable as well compared to other regions. So in that context, the mix of all those aspects made the geothermal market in Turkey very attractive for investors, and also helped develop projects quite quickly. So the combination of strong players developing those projects, the feed-in tariff system, of course, and a good and favorable pricing scheme for drilling activities have been the main drivers.
Thank you very much for the clarification and your time. And from the innovation point of view, I see that there are several studies ongoing, some of them supported by Made in America campaign, some of them with some Europe funding agencies like Horizon programs. We see all studies from material itself, development of new technologies, including this nano thinking into the cementing operations, non-corrosive casing materials, and also how to apply or how to extract heat in deeper environment, how we can drill faster, like this plasma bead approach. So they are all very nice. And I think bringing all them together, the future will be definitely geothermal, but which part of geothermal there I see EGS is like the growing child stepping in faster to the business. And I would like to pass microphone to Professor Dhanadula Chandrasekharan to talk about EGS, how we can utilize this high heat generating granites, for instance.
Thank you.
In the future technologies.
I have one question to Alex. Alex, I have one question.
Please.
The advantage Turkey has is the high heat generating granites are at a shallow depth, and that is where your feed-in tariff is going to be lower actually. That is the greatest advantage Turkey has. This is what I want to make a point here. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll put my presentation.
Thank you, Chandra.
Okay, then I would kind of lock myself out. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All nice to see you. And
nice to see you.
With my regards to Turkey, it's very much looking forward to see you again sometime soon.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Alex. Have a nice day.
Bye.